There is little quantitative data on human trafficking in the context of migration routes. Our research, Strive Research, aim at providing qualitative field evidence to contribute to a better knowledge and consciousness about what is trafficking in these migratory contexts. Following our evidences on the Mediterranean road, I can say that trafficking in human beings is an issue that is constantly increasing among people making the irregular route to Europe. For what concerns all the subjects involved: women, children, men. Women are mostly trafficked for sexual exploitation, care works, and work in agriculture, while men are mostly trafficked to be exploited in agriculture, textile industry, livestock industries, and begging. This won't happen mainly on the Mediterranean road, that is to say Italy, and then along the route to Germany, that is the country with the highest level of request for application for international protection for people on the route to Europe. Children can be trafficked for sexual exploitation, and a very important aspect to be underlined is that people on the route to Europe arriving in Italy are mainly passing through the Mediterranean route. So people disembark in Italy after a very dramatic transit phase that happens mostly in Libya and on the Mediterranean Sea. So people can be trafficked during the transit phase. This is an evidence that came out very often during our research. So during the transit phase or directly in Italy, they're not necessarily trafficked from the country of origin. These can also happen, but the majority of them are trafficked along the route or on arrival. So in our research, we divided among personal and contextual vulnerabilities. Some vulnerabilities are something that people bring with them from the country of origin, from their own experience, and from the context in which they were living and from which they come from. Other vulnerabilities are contextual and situational. That means that a person becomes vulnerable because he or she finds himself or herself in a situation that create this kind of vulnerability to trafficking. So for what concerns the individual level, we found that the young age and the gender, especially so female, are more vulnerable to trafficking, but also the context of origin and the level of education makes the difference in becoming more vulnerable to trafficking. Age and gender proven to be a very critical way of interpreting vulnerabilities, because we found that, of course, young age and gender, so children and women are more vulnerable, but also those considered non-vulnerable, that are young men normally, especially those in the phase of transition to the adulthood, so from minor age to 18 years old, proven to be the most vulnerable among vulnerable. They are in this phase of losing their protection rights as a child, so transitioning to adulthood, and very often they don't have the same services than before. But also they're not considered vulnerable anymore. So they lose access to a certain number of services that normally protect people from the risk of being trafficked. What concerns the transit phase, so the content, I pass immediately to the contextual vulnerabilities that are much more relevant for our cases. For what concerns the transit phase, the high cost of travel and the necessity to contract a debt before leaving makes the person highly vulnerable to trafficking. Often people need to rely on trafficking networks to leave because they don't have enough money to confront the trip. It's important to say that the irregular trip is very often much more costly than the possible regular one. From a social point of view, I can say that an important source of vulnerability is represented by the isolation of reception center from the center of the city, for example, or from services. So people live in a very isolated area, and it's very difficult for them to create their own network, to find a regular job, to find friends, to find a social network that can support them in this difficult phase of integration into a new country. So I believe that we should divide the raising awareness practice. So I will make some recommendation for the people of concern, migrants on the move. To raise awareness among migrants on the move, I believe that information at disembarkation points must be done in a more accurate way, and there must be required more time and dedication. Because information proven to be very, very crucial in also deciding to report the exploiters, for example, and to exit the trafficking network if they were trafficked in Libya before arriving in Italy. And also strengthening the activity of referral at disembarkation and the multi-agency work done either at disembarkation but also in the reception phase. If the multi-agency work is effective, that means mixing judicial service, social service, job opportunities, etc. So linking all together the services around the migrants makes it more possible for the person to feel confident in reporting if the person is living a condition of exploitation due to trafficking situation, or and at the same time makes the whole network able to recognize if the person is find himself or herself in such a situation. And from the other side, to raise awareness among stakeholders involved in working working around trafficking issues, I believe that we should invest a lot in training for those working with victims of trafficking and for those working with people on the move. Very often my informants told me that social workers, reception center officers, police are very often low-skilled, not skilled enough to be able to recognize a victim of trafficking and to make the person in a situation in which this person can feel free to talk, free to expose himself or herself to report the situation of exploitation. So they must become skilled in identifying victims, which is a very, very difficult task to arrive to. I think that we should also increase the common knowledge about trafficking. So through campaign directed not only to those that are in charge of working with as victims, but also towards all the population, making clear that there is trafficking in labor, in agriculture, for example. There is trafficking in prostitution. So it's something that is not far away from us, but it's something that touches our daily lives, touches what we buy at the market to eat. The oranges, the tomatoes we eat could be part of this exploitation network. So rising awareness among all the population And also, I believe, to conclude, that also rising awareness in the country of origin could help in limiting and eventually stopping the exploitation chain due to trafficking by strengthening the cooperation in between countries, so countries of origin, transit and destination, and exchanging good practices in between different countries. We are really in a very experimental phase to understand what COVID-19 is bringing to you, how COVID-19 is modifying the condition of people on the move and their exposure to trafficking in human beings. I believe that the closure of the borders or the increased control at borders definitely could increase the risk of detention and deportation if people find themselves in Libya, because they may have a reduced access to smuggling network to leave Libya, to leave the country in which they find themselves in. At the same time, the closure of the border may cause the impossibility to go back home, whether they find themselves in a situation of saying, okay, I want to quit this experience and need to go back home. The closure of the border makes this possibility no more doable for them. At the same time, many, I'm thinking about Libya especially, may have lost their petty informal jobs they had before. That was aimed at slowly gaining the money necessary to pay the smugglers to cross the Mediterranean or to leave Libya in other directions. They may have lost their jobs, so they may find themselves stuck, immobile in Libya. And being immobile in Libya can be very dangerous. This immobility can end up in becoming a victim of trafficking or relying on kind of networks that can become a network of trafficking. For other related problems can be caused by, for example, the reduced food availability due to the closure of the border, so an increased need of moving. Paradoxical, because we cannot move anymore, but the need of moving may raise, or the necessity of finding food and job opportunities. There may be an harsh decline in remittances in the country of origin, creating further poverty. This is World Bank data saying that probably remittances are already less present in the country of origin. This would reduce poverty probably and increase the need of moving from the country of origins.